And it'll take my Wi-Fi ages. There we go, we're live.
Well, hey.
Yeah. Hi everybody. Very happy to be joined by David Bishop. You write as DV Bishop, don't you, for the sake of our group?
Yes. DV Bishop is how I'm known, yes, for crime purposes.
Yes. Do you want to start us off with an intro to your book?
Absolutely. So, yes, my name's DV Bishop, David Bishop, and I write the Cesare Aldo series of historical thrillers, which are set in Renaissance Florence and are published by Pan Macmillan. The first in the series, City of Vengeance, was first published in, at the start of 2021, in the depths of lockdown, I seem to recall. And that won the New Zealand Book Lovers Award for Best Adult Fiction. And then the second book in the series was called The Darkest Sin, which is a close circle murder mystery set in a convent in Renaissance Florence. And that won the Crime Writers Association Historical Dagger, which was a complete surprise to me, I have to say. And then the third book in the series is called Ritual of Fire, which you can wrong arm, which you can see just above me, handily. There it is. Which just came out in paperback last week. So that's the third book in the series, and that's about a series of vendetta killings during a heat wave, while there's a big sort of religious mania takes hold of the people of Florence, which is being whipped up by people who are turning everybody a bit crazy for their own purposes, as we discover in the book. And that one was just shortlisted last Thursday on publication day for this year's New Zealand Book Lovers Prize for Best Adult Fiction, and was longlisted for the McIlvanney Prize in Scotland last September. Yeah.
Cool. And the McIlvanney Prize tends to have amazing books on it.
Yes. I was very happy because previously my books weren't eligible because I wasn't born in Scotland, and because my novels, they're in Renaissance Florence and Italy, so they're not set in Scotland, obviously. So the books previously weren't eligible for the McIlvanney Prize, but they changed the regulations last year, or the rules of the contest, so that if you were resident in Scotland, which I have been for 23, going on 24 years at this point, they were willing to let me in. So yeah, they've let in anybody now and as eligible for the McIlvanney Prize. Not anybody, but they let me be eligible, so that's fine by me. So yeah, no, there's some amazing books on the list, on the long list. Some amazing books on the short list. I'm doing an event at Granite Noir in Aberdeen this Sunday, in fact. And one of the people on the panel with me is Callum McSorley, who won the McIlvanney Prize last September for his debut, Squeaky Clean, which I've got sitting downstairs waiting for me to get a chance to read it. But I'll take it along and hopefully get him to sign it for me on Sunday.
Yeah, I've not read that one yet, but the winner of the debut prize, Kate Foster's book, was my book of the year last year.
Yes, I love that. I was very fortunate because we're both published by Pan Macmillan. I'm at Macmillan and she's at Mantle, which is a different imprint. So I got sent an advance copy of The Maiden. So I've been raving about that since, I think, Christmas last year or something. No, the previous year, in fact. So no, I thought that was an amazing book. I've done several events with Kate, actually, and I'm talking to her in Edinburgh next week. We're in conversation at Waterstones West End on Thursday the 29th, which I think is when the paperback of The Maiden comes out. So yes, I'm completely with you on The Maiden. It's great. And I'm supposed to be getting sent an advance copy of The King's Witches, which is her new book. I'm hoping to get a proof of that in the next couple of weeks. I just need time to do some actual reading is the challenge.
Yeah, that's always a challenge. We've got Patsy and Sarah both here.
Oh, hello.
Have both met you, apparently. Patsy
Yes.
says she's met you a few times. Sarah said she met you at Newcastle Noir.
That sounds right. Yes. No, lovely for them to come along. Hello, Patsy and Sarah.
So let's talk about the choices for 1537 Florence. Is it just so that you get lots of lovely research trips to Florence, or was it a particular area of historical interest, or?
I've always been interested in the Renaissance as a period in history, but I must admit, for a long time, I didn't know a lot about it. I only did history for 1 year at school, and I think I learned 4 facts in the entire year that I did history. So I wasn't the world's greatest history scholar, I have to say. But I'd always been interested in Renaissance Florence. And so this is, golly, at the late 90s. I was working in London in the late 90s. And on Fridays, I used to go for, we used to knock off early on Fridays, and I'd go and have lunch at the Pizza Express, which is just across the road from the British Museum. And then I go to all the bookshops in the area, all around there and down Charing Cross Road. And I went into what I guess was a remainder bookshop around the corner from the British Museum. And they had this monograph, you would call it, which basically somebody's PhD thesis turned into a book. And it was about the criminal justice system in late Renaissance Florence, so 1537 onwards. And I thought, well, that sounds vaguely interesting. And I picked up the book, and it fell open at page 86, and my eyes went to the sentence, and it said that the criminal justice system in late Renaissance Florence was roughly comparable to a modern police force. And I just went, light bulb moment. And I went, so I could write essentially a kind of police procedural, but it would be set nearly 500 years in the past in Renaissance Florence. Because in my head, they didn't really, we didn't have policemen before the Victorian age and Sir Robert Peeler and the Metropolitan Police. So I didn't think they were sort of like police as we think of them today. And yet they completely did. Nearly 500 years ago, they had investigating officers, they had constables, they had prison guards, they had courts and magistrates and everything else. So obviously they didn't have fingerprints or DNA or closed circuit TV or any of those other things that you get in modern crime fiction and indeed modern policing. But nonetheless, I thought I could write a police procedural set in Renaissance Florence. And so I started researching, and the more I found out about this period and this place and time in history, the more fascinated I became. And particularly the fact that, Florence gives you sort of the birth of humanism, the rediscovery of classicism. It gives you Da Vinci and Michelangelo and these incredible artists and amazing architecture, and then science and philosophy and thinking, and all of these things in the one place at the one time, basically due to the fact that there were a load of rich people who were slightly embarrassed at having too much money. So they decided to give it to the arts and be patrons of the arts and the sciences, unlike the billionaires of today. So all these people sort of clustered in Florence at this time. And yet at the same time, Florence is also notorious for the fact that it's where you get Machiavelli, who was this bureaucrat, civil servant, effectively, who wrote a book called The Prince, which effectively details how you seize power and how you maintain power. And it's where the term Machiavellian comes from. It's basically how you can backstab your way to the top and then front stab your way then onwards so that you stay at the top and retain power. So it's sort of like, the Dominic Cummings playbook in a large extent. So it felt, Renaissance Florence, you have art and architecture and science and philosophy, and yet you have political backstabbing and vendettas and, murderous conspiracies and the Medici family, who were quite cutthroat when they wanted to be, when it suited their purposes. And I thought all of these things was a great sort of melting pot into which you could put crime stories and solve mysteries at the same time. And the great thing about historical fiction is it enables you, if you want, to talk a little bit about the things that sort of, exercise you today, but you talk about them in their context in the past, so that people, if they want, can draw the link and see, but you don't have to. People can just hopefully just enjoy the story. My goal is always to write a page-turning book. I'm not going to win any, nobody's handing out Booker prizes for me. I can safely assume that's never going to darken my bookshelf. But I want to write a book that people are going to enjoy and going to keep turning the pages, and they're going to want to read just one more chapter. The sort of books, hopefully, that keep people up till 2 o'clock in the morning when they really should be getting some sleep because they've got work the next day. So that's always my goal with the writing. So those things combined, that sort of my fascination with Florence and the Renaissance, and then the fact that they had this criminal justice system that was like a modern police force. I thought, well, job's a good one.
You definitely achieved the page turner.
Good, yay, job done.
Well, I
Thank you.
think one of the things I really liked about it and wanted to ask you about was you go into historical crime, especially something set that far back, and you expect almost like a certain thing, and yours starts with like someone being murdered and they're not what they seem.
Hmm.
And there's like quite a strong theme of like sort of people like that running through the book that is really like different, I think, for a book set in that time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is it. I mean, one of the things that's like, so my main character is a man called Cesare Aldo, who's in the first book, he's an officer for the most feared and powerful criminal court in the city of Florence, which is called the Alto for short, because they had 8 magistrates. So he investigates crimes and tries to prevent crimes on behalf of the Alto in the city. But what marks Aldo out from other people is that he's a gay man at a time and place in history where that makes him a criminal. His sexuality makes him a criminal. So he's enforcing the law, he's defending the law, and yet he himself is a criminal. So I think on the cover of the book it says, you know, an officer of the law of the court on the wrong side of the law, because he's these two things at the same time. So Aldo always has the challenge of who can he trust? Who is it that's going to, you know, who is going, who can he trust with the secret of who he is? And so, unsurprisingly, as a consequence of that, Aldo is, you know, he has, I guess, a sensitivity to people who are different. I mean, he sees the fact that if you're rich and powerful, then you can get away with anything in Florence. You can buy your way out of trouble. Whereas the vast majority of people in the city are not rich and they're not powerful and they don't have a voice. So he believes in justice more than he believes in upholding the law. So as a consequence, that's a recurring theme that comes through the books, is that, you know, if your sexuality is different, or if you're a woman, because women have almost no power or voice or agency at that time in history in that place, or if you're from a religion that's a minority religion. So Jewish characters recur throughout the books, because as anybody's ever sat through The Merchant of Venice from Shakespeare will know, being Jewish and on the Italian peninsula and this sort of time, the 15th, 16th century, was a bit of a tough go. You were a minority and you were often despised or hated by the people around you. So yeah, so that element is definitely a key part of the books for me. I mean, I try not to be, you know, shoving it down the readers' throats. I just want it to be present in the background for people, and they can decide how they feel about these things. I mean, you read a book to be entertained. You don't read a book for a sermon. We have churches for that sort of thing.
But I think it's all part of like framing Cesare, isn't it, as like the kind of person he is and how he responds to things. It doesn't need to be you don't over egg the point,
Hmm.
but it is integral to how he's going to respond.
Yeah, it's part of who he is and how he responds in situations, and it impacts on the decisions that he will make and what he can and can't do and say. So yeah, so it's there, but it's not, as you say, the goal is never to over egg the pudding, is never to like be sort of banging a big drum of this is the way things should be, because it's not for me to tell people the way things should be. But yeah, equally, Aldo thinks and feels about things in a certain way, and he's not backwards and coming forward with his opinion sometimes. Plus, he has a tendency to want to antagonize people in authority, particularly his boss, Bindi, who basically runs the Alto. So he spends a lot of his time winding Bindi up, and driving him a bit crazy. But then, you know, Bindi gets his revenge at times as well. So he's not the nicest person in the world, Massimo Bindi.
No, he really. But then most of the people in it aren't the nicest person in the world. But then that's kind of what people are like, isn't it? Even the people who are the good guys aren't always nice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's all good or all bad, and I try and write characters who hopefully have some nuance to them, so that although a character might seem like they are, you know, pretty horrible or reprehensible, nevertheless you could see some glimmer of humanity, something within them that makes you think, okay, well, maybe they have some redeeming features. I'm not quite sure necessarily how many of them they have. And there are some characters who definitely have far fewer than others. But you always want to try and give people a sense of nuance to them. And then as contrast for Aldo, he has a sort of, not really a sidekick, but there's another character who's a constable in the first novel called Carlo Strocchi, who's a young man from a nice, small, friendly village in the Tuscan countryside who has moved to Florence and become a constable for the Otto when we first meet him. And he's quite an innocent and a little bit naive when we meet him in the first book. And he's going on this journey through each book as the series continues. So it's interesting because Aldo, to a large extent, is a fixed point in the series, but Strocchi's going on this very clear character arc and journey, and I'm intrigued to see where he's going to end up at the end of that. He's becoming slightly less nice, innocent country boy and slightly more Florentine and a bit more willing to lie and deceive to get what he wants. So he's evolving, let's say, as the series goes on.
But maybe not in a good way. Patsy said she thought she had Ritual of Fire solved, but she backed the wrong horse.
Well, that's what I love to hear. It's tricky sometimes when you're writing a book and you know who's behind it all, because I always worry that it's going to be too obvious on the page. I'm going to give it away because I know then the character's going to know and then the reader's going to figure it out. So Ritual of Fire, you're not quite sure. There are some readers who've said they figured it out very early. And I was like, oh, well done. If somebody figures it out halfway through the book, it's not going to spoil their appreciation of the book, hopefully. And they can pat themselves on the back. They get to the end and go, oh, yes, I was right the whole time. Go me. My partner, who reads voraciously, I mean, they read everything. What's more amazing about them is they read everything and they can remember the story. They can remember who done it in every film and TV show and every book they've ever read. Whereas me, it sort of goes in one ear and comes flying out the other. So they notoriously, they will start watching a film or a TV show. They'll read a book and they go, I think it's this one. It's going to be this one, isn't it? Because they've read so many things that they just go, they get to the end, they go, yeah, I knew what was going to happen. And that drives me a bit crazy. Yes, I always want to try and write one novel that they will go, oh, I didn't see that coming. But since we discussed the books while I'm writing them, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Not unless I sneak off and write a sneaky little novel over on the side and don't tell them about it.
Maybe. I never work it out. It's got to be really obvious for me to work out what's happened.
Yeah, well, the worst one is when I go to sort of murder mystery dinners. You go to those murder mystery dinners and people stand up and they do speeches. I get it wrong every time. And it's about, I write crime fiction. It's so embarrassing that I can't get these things right. So at the Theakston's Old Peculiar Crime Writing Festival in Harrogate last year, they have dinners and they put on a little sort of mini play, and they have one author per table, and all the people around, you work with the people around the table, the readers around the table, to try and figure out who done it. So I was an author on an author table at Harrogate last July. Couldn't get it right to save my life. Just terrible. And I told them in advance, I will be entirely wrong about this. You're better trying to figure it out for yourselves, because I will lead you down the wrong path. I'll either overthink it or underthink it, but I won't get it right. And so it proved. But yes, I'm going to be intrigued. I'm just finishing up work on the page proofs, which is the last stage of production for Aldo number 4, which is called A Divine Fury, and it's coming out in June in hardback and audiobook and ebook. And that one's it's a serial killer is killing people, obviously, David. For that one, I changed my mind who the killer was 30 pages from the end of the book. I was going, that's a bit obvious. Who else could it be? How about this person? And then sort of went, okay, golly, I wasn't expecting that. That's going to need some rewriting so it makes sense. So it's been rewritten so that now does make sense in retrospect. because you don't want myself and my editor, who's Alex Saunders at Pam Macmillan, who's a great editor, a wonderful editor, and we sat down. We were at Bloody Scotland in Stirling last year, and we had lunch, and we were talking through, okay, well, if it's this person, what does that mean for the way you've written the book? How is it going to work? Because you're going to need to do some rewrites to make sure that this makes any sense at all. You don't want the readers to go, you've just pulled that one out of thin air. That doesn't make any sense. Cheat. Because I hate films or books where you get to the end and it was impossible to know who done it. There's no way you could have figured it out. I mean, I don't mind misdirection and red herrings a go-go and all the rest. That's great. But when they just literally, some person wanders in off the street at the last minute and says, hi, it was me, I'm the killer. And then we'd all be like, yeah, that's so yes. So I had to go through and do some rewriting of A Divine Fury to make sure that when we get to the reveal of the killer, we're like, oh, of course, that does all make sense. So you always want the inevitable surprise, as it were. And it's not all about the twist. I'm not a big fan of books that are all about the twist, particularly if the publishers then put on the back cover, incredible twist. Because then you're just, I just start reading for the twist. I stop enjoying the book. I'm just trying to figure out the puzzle. And it means I don't get engaged with the characters as much. So, yeah, I always want people to engage with the characters most of all, best of all, because that's, for me, that's why I love reading series fiction. It's why I write series fiction, because I love the characters and I want to find out what happens to them next, as much as who done it or who killed what or whatever. I mean, that's all fine, but I'm never going to remember the plot. But I remember the book where so-and-so, I don't know, lost an arm or an eye or whatever, or fell in love or fell out of love or whatever it was that occurred, whatever trauma they suffered. That's what I'll remember. I'll remember the character stuff. I won't remember the plot at all. It's not in my memory banks.
Sarah said she was at the Harrogate Author Dinner and they lost last year.
Yes. Well, I was on a losing table as well. We were miles off. I got it completely wrong and I led my team astray badly. I'm a terrible team leader. I should not be allowed in front of people.
I really believe that characters are a big sort of selling point to fiction as well. Like, it is important, the plot, but I went back for book 2 more because I was sort of embroiled in the characters and I wanted to know what was going to happen to them.
Yes.
Just like it being a really good story.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you want to have a good story. You want people to be, thinking, but you want them to be feeling as well. If you can get people thinking about the story, activate the reader as a detective and make them care about the character at the same time, then you've got them, two ways. And without getting into any spoilers for anybody who hasn't read City of Vengeance, something does happen in the final 3 pages of the book that makes you go, I'm going to have to read book 2 now, aren't I, to see what happens, because something occurs. That was a bit cheeky of me, I have to say, because when I was writing the book, I had no idea if I was ever going to get to write book 2 or not, whether it would be published or anything else. But I spent 20 years doing the research for City of Vengeance, and basically 20 years terrified that I was going to mug it up. So I spent the longest time not writing the book and trying to learn everything I could about the period. And I finally got to 2017 and I went, okay, if you're ever going to write this book, David, you are going to have to get on with it and actually start typing. You can't put it off forever. I think 20 years is long enough of procrastination, even for me. So I started writing it in 2017. And then the ending, because it makes you want to hopefully pick up book 2 and find out what happened and how on earth and what kind of thing, which is a trick that Mick Herron does in his Slow Horses books. Is almost every book ends on some sort of which is not generally related to the book you've just read. It's just some question. He just asks a big question at the end of the book that makes you want to go, when's the next one out? I want to know what happens now. What does that mean? So I did a little bit of that at the end of book 1. I'll put my hand up to that. It was a little bit cheeky. Sorry.
It was more than a little snippet of book 2 as well that had Stroppy going back to his home village.
Yes.
And that was like, there's a little snippet of that ends with his mum fainting that I was like, now I've got to read book 2.
That's the joy of the paperback, is they put the first chapter of the next book at the end of the paperback to make you want to go and get it. So yes, so the new paperback of Ritual of Fire, which is on the shelf behind me, has got the opening chapter of number 4, A Divine Fury, at the end of it. And the opening chapter of A Divine Fury, amongst other things, introduces Aldo's getting a new frenemy, a character called the Contessa Valentine Cortello, who is Venice's spy master, chief spy in Florence. She spies on Florence for Venice, who had a very elaborate spy system that was run by an organization called the Council of 10, even though it actually had 17 people on it. But let's not even get into names. So we get to meet her in the first chapter of A Divine Fury, which is tucked in the back of the paperback of Ritual of Fire, and she's my favorite new character. So she appears every time I was writing book 4, and I'd be writing the Contessa. I got to admit, I slightly fell in love with her while I was writing with. I just love the character so much because she's so sort of arch and clever, and she's able to manipulate people, but do it in a way that makes people feel like it was their idea. So she's just a wonderful character to write. And she was only meant to have a little bit part in A Divine Fury, and she was in danger of stealing the whole book out from underneath Aldo if I wasn't careful. I had to keep restraining myself to not put her into more of the book than she deserved to be in. Anyway, Aldo and her are going to be reunited in book 5, which I'm writing at the moment. I just passed the first 10,000 words of book 5 yesterday, actually. So yes, that's due in. I've got to hand it in July, and it's coming out summer of 2025, so next year. Yes.
We're going to come back to book 5. The other thing I really liked in book 1 was that you wove in real events.
Yes. Yeah.
And like real people, and I think that's very brave to do in historical fiction, using like real people and real events. But also is one of the things that really makes me enjoy it.
Good. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, one of the key ideas of City of Vengeance of book 1, it revolves around a conspiracy to overthrow Duke Alessandro de' Medici, who was the ruler of Florence at the end of 1536. And there was actually this conspiracy to overthrow him. So I wove that into the fabric of the book. That was intrinsic to how the story plays out. And I mean, so that was sort of the start point for the series. The stories that have followed, they incorporate real events and, of course, real people from history, but they're not so central to the plot of the story, as it were. I've yet to come up with to encounter another moment in history that in and of itself would be able to sustain a whole novel. That's sort of the backdrop of what's going on or concerns that characters are having. But so Ritual of Fire, it revolves around there's a heat wave and a drought is affecting Tuscany and the areas immediately around Florence in the summer of 1538, and that's based on real events. There actually was a drought, and it got so bad that there was this painting of the Madonna, which was said to have great almost like religious powers effectively. So what they did, and this has actually happened, is they paraded this painting of the Madonna through Florence while praying for it to rain. It was said that this painting could ward off drought and famine and plague and floods, which is the other problem they always have in Florence. So they paraded the painting through the city and stopped at various churches, and they all prayed. And they got to the end of the tour of the city, and then the rains came, and it hadn't rained for weeks and weeks on end, and they were all just sort of dying of the heat. And because they had marched the painting through, and then it started to rain, and so everybody went, "Oh, this is incredible!" So that's an event that's in Ritual of Fire. Is they're taking this painting around of the Madonna to try and convince God that he should rain on Florence as soon as possible.
There's a question here about your character names, but before we do that, the choices of using real Italian, but just for the rude words?
Not just for the rude words.
Well, for a lot of the rude words.
Well, yes, but you can. I mean, I do use a sprinkling of Italian. Originally there was a lot more Italian in the books, and my editor Alex was like, "Okay, I'm loving the Italian words because they give it a nice flavor, but you've probably done too much." So I had to winnow back and pair. I think I took out about half the Italian words that were in the first version of City of Vengeance that he saw, because it was getting too much. Good call on his part. So yeah, so I do use Italian words in lieu of other words to indicate parts of the human anatomy, or how people feel about other individuals, and comparing them to waste products of the body. So we get the idea. So yes, I have had one or two readers who've reviewed it and have complained about Aldo in particular, in moments of stress or anxiety or despair, will either shout or hiss or mutter one particular word, which is palle, which basically is Italian for balls. Now, in the case of the Medici, the 6 balls are the symbol of the Medici. It's on the cover of the book. It's the Medici crest, is the 6 balls. So, it has a certain relevance to the topic I'm talking about. But it's, I think every character needs to have a certain thing that they say in moments of stress that they will reach for. And we did get into a long debate, my editor and I, actually while I was on holiday in Florence, and he was busy reading City of Vengeance, and he was saying, now the F word, would they have used it at this point in time in history? So I went off and did all this research to demonstrate the fact that the F word was fully used and available in the 1530s in this particular part of Italy. They would have used it, or its Italian equivalent. So yes, I will occasionally reach for a bit of Italian to add some local colour, let's call it.
It's excellent. I feel like my Italian vocabulary is
improving. I'd be careful where you use
I maybe wouldn't use it anywhere, but
yes, yeah. I think it could cause you more challenges than bonuses. But yes.
So Donna's asked how you choose your character names, because you've got to get them historically accurate as well. I would imagine the same with Italian as like now. There are names that are sort of more traditional and more modern.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've got a load of often I will look in the back. Off to one side here, I've got 2 bookshelves, 2 Billy bookcases loaded with reference books, and they've got a load of people's names at the back of them in the index. So when I'm starting a new book and I know I'm going to need about 50 names for all the different characters we're going to meet, I will just sit down and accumulate a load of lists of surnames and first names of people, and then make sure that we don't have too many people whose names all start with the letter C, for example, which can be a problem sometimes. And obviously with real people from history, I'll use the real name. So Massimo Bindi, who's in all the books, was actually the Segretario of the Otto at this point in history. He's a real guy. He's in the job until 1547, so he's going to be around for a while. And then for other people, sometimes the names, I will reach for the Italian word for whatever particular quality or attitude they possess. So the Contessa, Valentine Cotello, obviously Valentine is like, we think of heart, and Cotello is the Italian for knife, because she's the sort of person that would smile to your face while slipping the blade between your ribs, and doing it with a great deal of charm and elegance at the same time. So often I would deliberately choose names that if you go and look up the Italian meaning of the name, you might get a second hidden meaning behind what's going on. And sometimes it's just a name that sounds good or fits the character nicely. So
I absolutely love that. I'm going to be Googling more Italian translations, because I kind of worked out what the Italian for some of the words were in the book, and then went to check that was actually what they meant with Google Translate.
Yes. There's a character in A Divine Fury that's coming out in June, and his name currently is Tito Grossolano, and I was going to call him Tito Colosso, which is basically saying he was a colossal tit, is what it boiled down to. But I realized I had another character called Colucci and another one called something else. I just went, that's too many people whose surnames are the same. So he's become Grossolano instead, to indicate that he's an enormous gross tit instead. So that's how he got his name. Most people's names mean something. If you go and look up the Italian translation, it might well give you a clue to what this character is going to be like. Not always, but often is the case. I love the TV show Endeavour, which is like the young Inspector Morse, and all the character names in that have got hidden meaning behind them, or they're a reference to some obscure text or character from some film or from a Dickens book or something. So there's always some hidden joke going on behind the name. So I do a little bit of that, just a tiny bit.
Patsy commented way up the stream about how her sister really liked your books.
Yes.
And that she felt that they were very close, very true to Florence, and that you'd obviously sort of got the city really accurate.
Yeah. Well, yes, I've been several times. We went over just at the start of December. Actually, we were over in the first few days of December. We went back, and it's the first time we've been back since before lockdown. So it was great to go back, and also it gave me a chance to go and visit all the locations that are in Ritual of Fire and also that are in the next book, A Divine Fury, just so I could figure out, so that's what this looks like and what's immediately around it. Because the great thing about Florence is, the books are set nearly 500 years in the past, and yet so many of the buildings are still standing as they were 500 years ago. I mean, there's a few ugly Starbucks sandwiched in between all the glorious palazzo, but nonetheless, you can walk around and imagine how it was, and that makes it, really helpful just to immerse yourself in the city and imagine, and just figure out how long it will take you to get there. I remember we were there. I guess we flew over on New Year's Day 2018 while I was still writing City of Vengeance. So we actually arrived on New Year's Day, which is a weird time to travel because nobody flies on New Year's Day because everybody's got a hangover. We got there, and then I would get up in the morning and walk around in the city just as dawn was breaking over Florence, because it's about the only time when there's no tourists anywhere. It's just empty. It's like street sweepers, and that's it. There's nobody else. But I wanted to try and project myself into Florence 500 years in the past. And so I was wandering around, and what amazed me was how quickly I got lost, because I was deliberately not looking at a map or a phone or anything. So I thought, well, if I was new in the city, how would I get from X to Y? So I thought I knew where I was going. And then all the streets in central Florence are really narrow. They're really close together, and all the buildings are 3 stories high. So you sort of think as the big cathedral, the Duomo. In all the photos of Florence, you always see the Duomo. And the further away from Florence you are, the bigger it gets. And then the river Arno. But actually, you can hardly see both of those unless you're right next to them. They're always hidden by the buildings around you, because there's no skyscrapers in Florence. But because the streets are so narrow and the buildings are so close together, because they're still standing 500 years later, it's really easy to get lost. So when I was writing City of Vengeance, I wrote that into the book, that one of the characters gets lost. The bandit ringleader is trying to find something, and he gets lost while he's wandering around the city because he can't see the landmarks that he was expecting.
Yeah, I've been to Florence. It is absolutely a bit of a maze, isn't it?
Yes.
Trying to find your way around. So I was trying to work out where there's 2 prisons, isn't there, that you talk about in City of Vengeance. There's the main one that they work out of, and then there's Lestinge. I was trying to work out where that one would have been.
Yes. So the Otto is based in what's now the Bargello Museum, which is not far away from the main piazza in town. And then and so the Bargello Museum, where they've got Donatello's statue of the David, which is small and dark bronze, and that sort of thing, you can go in and pay your entrance fee and wander around and all the rest. And it is really cold in there. It's remarkably cold in there, which it shouldn't be. Even on the hottest of days, you're like, how do they make it so cold in this building? And then the Lestinche, which is the prison, it's actually only about 4 blocks away from the Podestar, as it is in the books. And then that got pulled down in the 19th century, and I think there's a theatre standing. on the block where it is now. The only thing that's left of the old prison building is one corner, and they've got the little tabernacle, the little sort of sacred statue that you can go along and pray to. That's still standing there. The rest has all been wiped away by history. So it's the Teatro something or other, I think, is standing there now, and then a load of other shops. But yeah, it's just slightly, it's halfway between the Bargello and Santa Croce. Yeah, so
how many books do you envisage there being? Because they sort of seem to take part a year apart. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the first 4 books are a different season, each one. So we start in winter, it's called 1536, but that's because at that point in history in Florence, the new year didn't start till the 25th of March. It was still the old year until you got to March 25th, and then it became the start of the new year, which is an odd thing. But then they were still using the old calendar, the Julian calendar. Yeah. Anyway, so it starts in 1536, the back end of 1536 in winter. The second book, The Darkest Sin, is March 1537. So it's only 3 months later. So we're just into spring. And then number 3 is Ritual of Fire. That's summer 1538. So it's like a year and a bit later. But it's in the summer during the heat wave. And then number 4, which is coming out in June, A Divine Fury, that's autumn. That's the back end of October and the start of November. And then the one I'm writing at the moment, number 5, is that's in the back end of winter again. But I'm trying to slow down, actually, because I was in danger of sort of fast forwarding sort of 1 year in real time kind of thing with Eldo. But I know that there's something that's going to happen in 5042 and actual history that's going to make Eldo's life a lot tougher. And so I'm deliberately slowing the pace down of how quickly we're getting there, because I don't want him to have to face what's coming in July 1542. So I'm deliberately, so the next one is, it's just in the run up to Carnival in Venice. Number 5, Eldo Goes to Venice, which is the one city he has sworn he would never go back to, but events conspire against him and he's going to Venice. So there's going to be gondolas and canals and people in masks and skulking around and up and down bridges and through corridors and all. So I'm looking forward to, well, he's going to get to Venice at about the 40,000 word mark in book 5. In my head, at least, that's the calculation. So yeah, he's going to Venice and he's going to be teamed up with the Contessa again, against his will and against his better judgment, because he has to go and do something, which I won't get into anyway. But yeah, so book 5 is it's just before Lent begins. So Carnival in Venice is where they celebrate in the run up to the start of Lent, where you had to abstain from meat and everything else that you had to give up on. So Carnival in Venice has always been the celebration of excess and everybody wearing masks and pretending to be somebody that they're not. So that really plays into the Contessa's hands, because that's what she's all about, is wearing one mask and pretending to be another thing. So yeah, and then, I mean, I'm contracted to write books 5 and 6. So I'm writing book 5 at the moment, and then book 6 will come out in 2026. And then we shall see, really. I mean, it's down to the readers as to whether I get to write any more, whether I get another contract. I mean, I hope so. I'm having a brilliant time. I'm loving it. And I just sat down a couple of weeks ago and made a list of the subgenres that Eldo hasn't done yet. Because each book in the series, it's a crime novel, obviously, and it's historical, obviously. But each book is also its own little subgenre. So City of Vengeance is a conspiracy thriller. The Darkest Sin is a closed circle kind of locked room mystery. Ritual of Fire is vendetta killings. A Divine Fury is a serial killer, although obviously it's 1539. Yeah, I think that's right. 1539. And the name serial killer is not invented until the 1970s properly. By the FBI Behavioral Science Unit. So nobody gets called a serial killer in the book, because there's no such thing as a serial killer yet. I mean, there is in the book, but they don't have that name. So that's number 4. And then number 5 is a sort of espionage caper, heist, Sans Venice, basically. Yeah, it really will be quite Mission Impossible. So yeah, and then so I sat down and made a list of all the subgenres that Aldo hadn't done yet, of all the crime subgenres it could be. And I was thinking, well, he's not really a cozy crime kind of guy. Not when you carry around a stiletto in your boot that you're willing to pull out and stick into somebody at a moment's notice. So it probably won't be cozy crime. But I've got a few other ideas of subgenres he hasn't encountered yet. So there's lots of fun still to be had, hopefully.
I feel like his sidekick could be a cozy crime-ish kind of guy.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are some stories where I think about them. Like book 4 originally was going to be involved. It was going to involve sort of orphanages and the exploitation of children. And I just went, it's not a very Aldo kind of story. You know, he doesn't have children. He's never going to have children. I mean, we do discover in one of the books, I can't remember which one it is, that he's actually very good with babies, weirdly, which is not a skill set that he ever thought he would have. But he discovered he's just a natural with babies, effectively. But yeah, I was going to do one about the exploitation of children. I went, oh, A, it sounds like such a downer. I'm not sure I want to tell that story. And B, it doesn't seem like a very Aldo story. It seems like a Strachey story. I could see Strachey absolutely investigating that. But it's not a case that's very Aldo. So I sort of put that idea to one side. And I do think I can imagine spin-offs from the Aldo books. I could see Strachey doing his own thing. I could see the Contessa going off once we all meet her. If the readers respond to her as the way I hope they will, I could see her having her own maybe novellas or something. And then there's Strachey's wife, as it is from book, as we discover in the first chapter of book 2, Tamazia, who's sharp as all get out, and frankly would make a better detective than almost anybody else in the books. But obviously, that's not a job available to a woman at that point in history. But yeah, I could see Tamazia having fun, and you may not have, if you're still reading The Darkest Sin, you may not have encountered Aldo's step-niece Isabella just yet.
No.
Oh, she's a pistol, I've got to say. Yeah, she's 15 or 16 in book 1, and wow, okay, yeah, she's a rebel. So yes, I could see her having fun.
No, I might have. Is she the one who's about to be married off to someone?
Yes. Yeah, they're trying to get him married off, and shenanigans ensue, I think is the best way to describe anything involving Isabella, because she knows her own mind, it would be fair to say. Yeah.
Excellent. You've been asked if you're going to do an Edinburgh launch for book 4.
I mean, I hope so. That would be lovely. That will depend. I mean, that's a conversation I've yet to have with Gillian, the wonderful Scotland rep for Pam Macmillan. I imagine I will talk to her, see her in the next week or two, maybe at Granite Noir, or else at. I'm definitely seeing her in Edinburgh on the 29th when we've got the paperback launch for The Maiden by Kate Foster, where I'm in conversation with Kate. So yeah, it would be lovely to have an Edinburgh launch for book 4. That'd be great. But not a decision I get to make, unfortunately.
Someone's off to Google 1542. Apparently, book 3 is where Aldo is great with babies.
Ah, that sounds about right. Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yes, that's right, because they've had the baby, Bianca. Yes. Not Aldo, obviously, he doesn't have a baby, but he proves to be very good with babies, to his surprise and to Strachey's frustration, it has to be said.
Excellent. Love it. One of the questions I wanted to ask you as well is, so you publish as D.B. Bishop for this, and in the book it sort of gives your history of sort of coming round to launching these books, but does not discuss some of your other publishing history in there. And I'm wondering how much of that has helped you write those books.
Oh, immensely. Honestly, it's one of the reasons why I waited 20 years to start writing the Aldo novels. Is I didn't think I was good enough. Frankly, I was worried that I wasn't a good enough writer or had enough experience and enough skills to pull it off. So yeah, my first novel, a professionally published novel, was published in 1993, so more than 30 years ago now. I used to write what's called tie-in novels. So that's books which are based on pre-existing, pre-created characters and universes. So I've written Doctor Who novels. I've written Judge Dredd novels. I wrote a Nightmare on Elm Street novel with Freddy Krueger tormenting the Breakfast Club, which was basically the plot of my book. Um, I've written World War II horror novels. I've written science fiction romps in the future. I've written all sorts of. I've written Warhammer fantasy novels. So I wrote an awful lot of things featuring other people's characters. But I always wanted to write novels with my own characters that I created, where I was completely in charge and I could do whatever I wanted with. Because with tie-in novels, I mean, they're great fun, and you get to play with somebody else's toys, and you don't need to invent the universe because most of the heavy lifting's already been done for you. So if you write a Doctor Who novel, then well, we've already got the TARDIS and the Doctor and a companion, and then you can just have fun after that. Or the challenge then is trying to think of something original to say with the Daleks, for example. So that was all training, and then the other thing I did, which I think helped, is I did a master's in screenwriting, and then I wrote for radio plays for the BBC, and then TV dramas for the BBC as well. I wrote for Doctors and a few other things. And I think screenwriting really helps you think differently about how you tell stories, much more visually, and also makes you think more about your dialogue and how each character needs to sound distinct and different from one another and have their own voice, if you will. So I think all of that has helped me become the writer I am, for better or for worse. I mean, having written I was a journalist in my youth, which teaches you to write to deadline and be succinct and get on with it. But it does slightly also make you what you might call a fit for purpose writer. If it's good enough, that'll do pig. And really, I never want to lapse into that kind of writing for my older novels. I want to make them absolutely the best I possibly can with, the skills I have available. And then I'm lucky. My agent Jenny Brown has got a very keen editorial eye, so she will read the manuscript and she'll say, "Well, this is all great, but you might want to think about this." And then my editor Alex will go through the book. He'll read the book several times and he'll go through it, with a fine-tooth comb, and he'll tease out the things that need to be expanded upon or need to be slowed down. I remember on City of Vengeance, he said mostly when I'm working with writers who write historical fiction, I have to tell them to pick the pace up. There's a slight tendency to sort of wallow in the past, and you've done so much research and we can feel it on every page. And he said, actually, you could slow down. Your book is a little too pacey at the moment. We could just slow the pace down occasionally and just actually let us sort of steep in the environment, let the reader feel like they're properly immersed in the time and the place. So, which I think is probably why the Aldo novels are somewhat notorious for being quite pungent. There's a lot of smells in the books. Every room, every place Aldo goes has got a smell about it. Because it's one of the things I thought, okay, all right, well, there's nothing I find when I read a book, if somebody describes a smell to me and they do it in a way, then I just feel like I'm transported there. I always remember a book that a friend of mine wrote, and he described, God, I can't remember what it was. It was like some drug or something, but it smelled like mushrooms rehydrating. Like you get dried mushrooms and you stick them into hot water to make stock for risotto. And just that smell, it's so hugely evocative. So, yes, one of my writer friends, they read The Darkest Sin and they went, "Oh, the lavender book. I can't smell lavender without thinking of that book now." There's a lot of lavender smells in The Darkest Sin, as you will discover as you progress through the convent. Every now and then somebody wanders outside and there's another big waft of lavender up the nose.
Marvelous. I sort of enjoyed the bits of the atmosphere setting through things like what was the bit I really enjoyed, the courtesans in the church, and like the whole little conversation that was just perfect. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, I think the two courtesans, I think they're probably a forerunner of the Contessa, who's also a kind of courtesan. So I loved writing those two courtesans in the church, and then they came back later in the book, just because I enjoyed them so much, and they were just so catty and just so scathing about each other. So I think the Contessa, who's in Divine Fury, she's sort of a slightly more upmarket, upscale version of those, with a lot more power at her hands. So yes, I do. I love writing women who know their own mind and who get their own way, no matter what the circumstances are. And the Contessa is definitely that. And those courtesans, they didn't always get their own way by any stretch, but they were just great fun to write. And yeah, I always want the book to have I don't want it to be all just doom and gloom the whole time. I'd like there to be, something to give a reader a reason to sort of smile and just enjoy the moment, or these minor triumphs that characters have, because I think it really helps just bring it alive on the page.
I think that's where you're going back to your screenwriter thing as well, because those are the little things that if you were watching it in a film or a show would really sort of bring it to life.
Yeah, I mean, I love films and TV shows where every character has a personality, like they actually stand out, and they feel like they've got something to say for themselves, and even if they've only got 3 lines, you could feel that a good actor will really make something out of them. So yeah, so I always think, if they were to make a film or a TV version of Aldo, which I think is financially impossible because it would just be hideously expensive. Although, if Amazon Prime want to do it, I'm not going to say no. But yeah, I always think, I would like each character. If I was an actor, I'd be like, oh, I've only got 5 lines, but I've got 5 good lines. I get a moment, I get to do something. I get to stand out and stick in the minds of the audience. So I always want to think, I try and write characters if they're like a juicy part for an actor to get their teeth into. So yeah, I think the screenwriting, probably helps with that. Yeah.
We've got a few minutes left. I could ask you so many more questions, but we've only got a few more minutes left. Finish us off with some reading recommendations. What have you read recently that you've enjoyed?
Ooh, okay. All right. Well, 2 books which I recommended on my author newsletter last month. One is The Book of Secrets by Anna Motsola. Anna wrote The Clockwork Girl, which was up for the Historical Dagger last year. And she also did, House of Ghosts, I think. But the Book of Secrets just came out. No, it's coming out next month. It's coming out in March. We're still in February, aren't we? We are, yes. So that's coming out next month. And that is set in Rome in the 17th century. And essentially it's about women who turn to a kind of witch to help them deal with their violent, murderous husbands and the consequences of that. That's a great read. The other one I read, which is very different, is called Blood Flowers, and it's set in Poland as the 1939 as the Nazis occupy it, and a Polish soldier comes back from the front line, and he's a police detective, and he's persuaded to work with the occupying German forces to help solve crime, but at the same time he's feeding information to the Polish resistance. But he can't tell anybody that he's feeding information to the Polish resistance. So it's, can he keep both sides happy, and can he, preserve, his soul effectively while collaborating with the occupying forces, but for a greater cause, which is the ultimate liberation of Poland, but knowing that she is away. So that's by Douglas Jackson. So if you like World War II and police procedurals, that's a cracker. Paper Cage by Tom Baraguanov, which is a hard name to spell. That has, I think, just came out last week. And that is a murder mystery. That's a New Zealand noir, effectively, set in a large town or a small city called Masterton. That's very good. And then Cabinet Macabre by Tom. Oh, I can't remember his last name. That's terrible. That's coming out in April. And I've read the first few chapters of that, and that looks great as well. So some amazing crime writing coming out in the next few weeks and months.
Then a quick fire question, because it's brilliant. Is Aldo based on anyone you know?
He isn't actually. No. I think Aldo is sort of like the version of me I would love to be. but he's far more he's a lot braver than I am, I have to say, and a lot more willing to antagonize those in authority. Although God knows I've had my moments. But yes, yeah, no, I don't think he's not based on it. The only thing he's really inherited from me is a dodgy left knee, because I've got a very dodgy left knee, and so I gave that to Aldo because I knew I would always know which knee was the dodgy one because it's mine.
Fair enough. And then finish off by reminding people what they're going to go off and buy.
Oh well. So there are 3 Cesare Aldo novels already out and are available all in paperback or audiobook or ebook. The first one's called City of Vengeance. That's the hang on. Damn, no. It's the red cover is what you need to know. This one. So that's City of Vengeance. That's the red cover. That's the first in the series. That's the conspiracy thriller. Then it's followed by Darkest Sin, which is this one here, in a sort of teal. That's all set in a convent, and essentially Aldo investigates reports of intruders at a convent and finds the dead, naked body of a man deep inside the convent who's been stabbed 27 times and he's covered in blood, and none of those things should be inside a convent. And he has to try and figure out what's going on. And in number 3, which is Ritual of Fire, and that just came out last week in paperback. And as I say, that's a vendetta during a heat wave with religious mania, and rich merchants are being burned alive as punishment for what they did 40 years ago.
That's really good summary. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we could keep it for another hour at least, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.